The Invisible Man, Episode 1, Beneath Their Notice. Marcus Chen hunched over his janitorial cart, carefully avoiding eye contact with the three executives blocking the hallway. Their loud laughter echoed off the marble floors of Madison Tower's 47th floor, home to Vertex Capital, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. He'd learned long ago that invisibility was his best defense. At 32, Marcus had perfected the art of fading into the background, becoming part of the furniture in the gleaming offices he cleaned every night. "I'm telling you, Richardson practically begged me to take his client," said the tallest of the three, Harrison Powell, Vertex's youngest partner at 35. His Italian suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. The old man's losing his touch. "His glory days are behind him," agreed Eliza Winters, the only woman in the trio. Her crimson-soled heels clicked impatiently as she checked her diamond-encrusted watch. "Speaking of behind, can we get some service here?" It took Marcus a moment to realize she was addressing him. He looked up, careful to maintain his professionally neutral expression. "Sorry, ma'am. Just need to get past to finish the conference room." "Well, hurry up then," she said, not bothering to move. The third executive, a red-faced man Marcus knew as Mr. Davenport, didn't even acknowledge the exchange, continuing his story about his recent Maldives vacation. Marcus waited another uncomfortable moment before gently maneuvering his cart around them, accidentally brushing Harrison's pant leg in the process. "Watch it!" Harrison snapped, jumping back as if touched by something contaminated. He made a show of examining his trousers. "These are bespoke Brunello Cucinelli. Do you have any idea what they cost?" "Sorry, sir," Marcus murmured, eyes downcast. "Won't happen again." "Make sure it doesn't. These pants cost more than you make in a year." Marcus bit his tongue and pushed his cart forward. The truth was, Harrison wasn't that far off. The executives resumed their conversation as if he'd never existed, their voices fading as he turned the corner. Inside the empty conference room, Marcus allowed himself a moment of respite. He gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city stretching below, lights twinkling in the early evening darkness. Somewhere out there was his cramped studio apartment in a neighborhood these people would never visit. Somewhere out there was a different life, one he'd once been destined for before everything fell apart. "You okay in here?" The voice startled him. Sophia Rodriguez, another member of the janitorial staff, stood in the doorway with concerned eyes. At 28, she was one of the few people at Madison Tower who actually saw him. "I'm fine," Marcus said, turning his attention to wiping down the massive conference table. "Just the usual." "Harrison and his crew?" Sophia asked, entering the room and starting to empty trash bins. "That guy's the worst. Did you know he made Delia cry last week? Just because she accidentally interrupted his precious phone call." Marcus nodded. "Not surprised, they don't see us as people." "Well, screw them," Sophia said with a defiant grin. "My brother's band is playing tomorrow night at the basement. You should come. Might do you good to get out." Marcus hesitated. He rarely socialized these days. After losing everything 4 years ago, he'd retreated into himself, finding it easier to avoid connections than to explain his downfall. Still, Sophia had been nothing but kind since he started at Madison Tower 2 years ago. "Maybe," he said finally. "Thanks for the invite." 7:30, no excuses, she said firmly, heading back to her cart in the hallway. "And Marcus? Those assholes don't know anything about you. Remember that." If only she knew, Marcus thought, returning to his task. 4 years ago, he'd been on track to become one of them, perhaps even more successful. Now, he cleaned their messes and endured their contempt. As he worked, Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification. Another email from his former law school classmate, David Park. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk. Important." It was the third such message this month. Marcus hadn't responded to the previous ones. David was the last connection to his former life, and Marcus had deliberately severed that tie along with all the others. Some memories were better left buried. Clarissa Beaumont's charity gala was exactly as insufferable as Marcus had expected. Officially, he was here as additional janitorial support. The Westmont's regular staff needed reinforcements for events of this size. Unofficially, he was studying the dynamics of high society with the detached interest of an anthropologist. The ballroom glittered with wealth. Women draped in designer gowns and jewels that could feed a family for years. Men in tuxedos worth more than most cars. The air smelled of expensive perfume and privilege. Marcus emptied a trash receptacle discreetly, listening to nearby conversations. Stock portfolios, boarding schools, summer homes. The concerns of people who'd never worried about making rent. Darling, you simply must meet the Aldersons. They've just returned from Venice. The voice sent an electric shock down Marcus's spine. Alexandra Caldwell, once Alex to him when they'd shared late nights studying for law school exams and later his fiancée. Now, she stood 10 feet away, resplendent in a midnight blue gown, her arm linked with Nathan Whitley, her husband of 2 years. Marcus froze, half hidden behind a large floral arrangement. Alexandra was even more beautiful than he remembered. Her dark hair swept into an elegant updo, diamonds glittering at her throat. Diamonds he recognized. He'd given her that necklace on their 3rd anniversary, spending far too much of his first-year associate's salary at Preston and Marsh Law. Nathan Whitley, silver-haired at 45, represented everything Marcus had lost. Partner at Preston and Marsh, member of the right clubs, owner of the right address. He'd been Marcus's mentor once. Now, he was Alexandra's husband. Marcus watched as Alexandra laughed at something Nathan said, tilting her head in that familiar way. Did she ever think about him? Did she regret abandoning their engagement when his life imploded? Or had he simply been erased, like a bad investment in an otherwise impeccable portfolio? You gonna empty that, or just stare at it all night? Marcus blinked, turning to find his supervisor, Hector, watching him with raised eyebrows. Sorry, Marcus muttered, quickly finishing his task. Look alive, Chen. The client's watching. Hector nodded toward Mrs. Beaumont, the evening's imperious hostess, who was scrutinizing the service staff from across the room. Marcus nodded and moved to the next station, careful to keep his back to Alexandra. The last thing he needed was a reunion. He doubted she'd even recognize him anyway. He'd lost weight since then, grown a beard, and adopted the slouched posture of someone trying not to be noticed. I hear they're announcing the Prescott Foundation grants tonight, said a woman nearby, her voice carrying over the string quartet. My money's on the Richardson proposal. Revolutionary cancer research is hard to vote against. Don't be so sure, her companion replied. Harrison Powell's urban development pitch has serious backing. Plus, his father-in-law's on the board. Marcus's ears perked up at the mention of Harrison. Of course, the arrogant executive would be here. The Prescott grants were major news in philanthropic circles. $50 million to be divided among worthy causes. Harrison would never miss an opportunity to network with the city's elite. As if summoned by Marcus's thoughts, Harrison appeared at the bar just a few feet away, holding court with several admirers. He looked even more polished than at work, his tuxedo fitting like a second skin, his perfect white teeth flashing as he delivered what was surely a well-rehearsed anecdote. Marcus Chen? The voice came from behind, uncertain but insistent. Marcus turned slowly, a sense of dread washing over him. David Park stood there, eyes wide with disbelief. His former classmate looked exactly as Marcus remembered, slightly rumpled despite his expensive suit, thick glasses, expression earnest. Once they'd been inseparable, from law school through their early careers. Now, David was a living reminder of everything Marcus had lost. It is you, David said, lowering his voice. My God, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. What are you doing here? His eyes dropped to Marcus's uniform, confusion evident. Working, Marcus replied flatly, glancing around to ensure no one was watching this uncomfortable reunion. I need to get back to it. Wait, David grabbed Marcus's arm as he tried to move past. This is important. I've been trying to tell you. Everything okay here? Harrison Powell had materialized beside them, eyebrows raised in elegant concern. Up close, Marcus could smell his cologne, something exclusive and undoubtedly expensive. "Fine," Marcus said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he looked between them. "Do I know you?" he asked David. David straightened, professionalism taking over. "David Park, Hanover Partners. We met at the Bloomberg conference last spring." "Ah, yes," Harrison nodded, though it was clear he had no recollection. His gaze shifted to Marcus, dismissive. "And you are?" David began. "Just doing my job, sir," Marcus interrupted. "If you'll excuse me." He moved away quickly, ignoring David's frustrated expression. The last thing Marcus needed was for his worlds to collide. David would want explanations, would try to pull him back into a life that no longer existed. And Harrison, the thought of that smug bastard learning who Marcus had once been, was unbearable. Marcus retreated to a service corridor, leaning against the wall as he caught his breath. Coming here had been a mistake. Too many ghosts, too many reminders. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "You still coming tonight? Band starts at 8. Don't make me drag you there." Marcus stared at the message, considering. The noise and crowds of a bar held little appeal, but the alternative was returning to his empty apartment with tonight's memories for company. "There you are." David had followed him into the corridor, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "I can't do this now," Marcus said, straightening. "I'm working." "You've been avoiding me for years," David replied. "You disappeared after the trial, changed your number, moved without telling anyone. Do you have any idea how worried we've all been?" "We?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "There is no we, David. Everyone scattered when things got tough. You moved on. I moved on." "That's not fair, and you know it," David said, stepping closer. "You pushed everyone away, but that's not why I've been trying to reach you." He glanced around the empty corridor before lowering his voice. "It's about Warrington." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Charles Warrington, the man who had destroyed his life, his career, his future. "What about him?" Marcus asked, tension radiating through his body. "He's dying," David said simply. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and he's asking for you." Marcus stared at his former friend, processing this information. Charles Warrington, the billionaire financier who had orchestrated Marcus's downfall, now facing his own mortality. "Why would I care?" Marcus finally asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Because he wants to make amends," David replied, "and because he's changed his will. Marcus, you need to hear what he has to say. It could change everything." Before Marcus could respond, the service door swung open, and Hector appeared, looking irritated. "Chen, break's over. Mrs. Beaumont is making a speech, and we need all hands for the champagne service." "I have to go," Marcus told David, almost relieved for the interruption. "Take this." David pressed a business card into Marcus's hand. "My personal number is on the back. Call me. Tomorrow. This is your chance to get your life back." Marcus pocketed the card automatically and followed Hector back into the ballroom, his mind racing. Charles Warrington dying, wanting to make amends, a changed will. It sounded like a trap, or worse, a cruel joke. As he circulated with a tray of champagne flutes, Marcus caught sight of Alexandra again. She was watching Mrs. Beaumont at the podium, her expression attentive. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the room. A flicker of recognition passed over her face, followed by something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Shock? Guilt? Regret? Before he could process it, she looked away, leaning to whisper something to Nathan. Marcus moved on, distributing champagne to guests who barely acknowledged his existence. "And it is with great pleasure," Mrs. Beaumont was saying into the microphone, "that I announce the recipient of this year's Prescott Foundation Special Innovation Grant in the amount of $25 million. The room hushed in anticipation. Marcus noticed Harrison Powell standing straighter, a confident smile playing at his lips. Harrison Powell for his visionary urban renewal initiative. Applause erupted as Harrison made his way to the stage, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. His victory speech was practiced humility, thanking the foundation, praising the other finalists, promising to transform the city's forgotten neighborhoods. Marcus watched with detached interest. $25 million to a man who had everything, while the people actually living in those forgotten neighborhoods struggled to survive. The irony wasn't lost on him. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus found David's card burning a hole in his pocket. Charles Warrington was dying. The man who had framed him for financial crimes, who had testified against him, who had watched impassively as Marcus's life was dismantled piece by piece. That man wanted to see him now. 4 years ago, Marcus had lost everything. His position at Preston and Marsh, his reputation, his fiancée, his friends, his future. Only a last-minute legal technicality had kept him from prison, but by then, the damage was done. No law firm would touch him. His savings had been devoured by legal fees. And Alexandra had returned his ring with a letter explaining she couldn't handle the uncertainty. Marcus had rebuilt from nothing. A different life. A smaller life. The invisible man with a mop and a trash bin. Was he really considering reopening those old wounds because Warrington had an attack of conscience on his deathbed? As he collected discarded napkins and empty glasses, Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another text from Sophia. "Band's killing it. Where are you?" Perhaps that was the answer. Move forward, not back. Forget David. Forget Warrington. Forget Alexandra and the past. Choose the present. Music in a dive bar with people who saw him as he was now, not as the cautionary tale he'd become. Marcus finished his shift, changed out of his uniform in the employee locker room, and stood on the sidewalk outside the Westmont. To his left lay the path to the basement, to Sophia and her brother's band. To his right, the subway that would take him home to his empty apartment, where he could think about David's revelation. As he hesitated, rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Marcus tilted his face up, letting the water wash over him, a cleansing, a reset. His decision made, Marcus turned and walked purposefully into the night. David's card still tucked in his pocket. A possibility, a reckoning, a door to a past he'd tried desperately to forget. The city's lights blurred in the rain, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt the stirring of something long dormant. Not hope exactly. He'd learned better than to hope, but possibility. And beyond that, something even more dangerous. Curiosity about what Charles Warrington could possibly say to make amends for destroying a man's life. Tomorrow, Marcus would make the call. Tonight belonged to the present. Subscribe the channel and click the notification icon to know when next episode comes.